What is up, guys? This is another YouTube video or Twitter video, wherever I post this. Um, and I'm just gonna dive straight into it. I'm trying to figure out how the heck to use Screen Studio, so I'm gonna just move myself around like this for now. So I saw this tweet from Jan, and he was talking about, is there any Webflow plugin that makes this window bigger? Added in 400 rows inside this is pure nightmare. And I couldn't agree better. Like, I've been the same guy as well that's written code inside of, the Webflow space to write code. And it's just hard. Once you're doing lots of like advanced projects and you start to need a lot of code, and it's just very hard to manage. And I feel like you're doing lots of mental gymnastics just to manage this. And I saw Marvin made a comment, why aren't you using GitHub with live serving as JS deliver? And I was like, banger, I've got a solution for this. I'm going to make a demo video, and that's pretty much what this video is. So if you're coming from a background where you already use Webflow and you write a lot of custom code, custom JavaScript in Webflow, then stick around because this might be for you, right? And again, I'm not saying there's a problem. You can write your code like this, right? But again, like I said, it becomes harder to manage once you have lots of code in. Last I remember, Webflow's also got a limit. I can't remember how many characters it is, but Webflow has got a limit to how much code you can write. And I've got a demo that I'm going to show, but if you go into site settings and then you go into custom code, this is usually where you got to write all your code, right? And you put in all your code, and there's a limit to how much code you can write. And this is just a very weird way, and I don't like this method, right? And I know there's definitely a product out there. I should give him kudos, like Slater, that does that for you, right? And you can have like your individual JavaScript files inside of Slater, as you can see in this screenshot. And then I guess Slater gives you a snippet as a script, right? Kind of like something like script dash https/slater.com/ pagination.js. But I think the downside of this, because I've only used Slater a few times, is if I have 30 JavaScript files, then that means I have to write the script code for 30 JavaScript files, right? So again, once you start doing lots of like heavy projects or projects that you have lots of code on, then it becomes a little bit harder to manage, right? But I do think Slater is still a good tool for certain use cases. But if you want to dive into like the code world a little bit, like I do, then stick around. So rather than doing this or using Slater, if you want an alternative option, then I'm going to share with you what I've built or what I've been building so far. And I'm calling it ViteFlow for now. And I've gone through like multiple iterations of this, and this got actually started by my friend Shay. He's also a dev, and I've kind of like taken it, made improvements, and I'm just going to share what this looks like for you guys. And I've made this specifically with Webflow developers in mind, right? So you might be wondering, well, what the heck is Carter talking about? And I'm going to demo this live with you guys. Again, raw, uncut. So I've got this template. This is currently private, and I'm going to keep it private till I know it's stable for public use. I think it's stable. I use it on lots of projects already, but if you're going to release something in public, you want to be more careful. So I'm going to create a new repo, and you guys would all be able to do this, and I'm going to call this ViteFlow Demo 2, right? And if you are creating a new project, right, you would create a new repository in GitHub for your project. And you could decide to make this public or private, and I'll share why I'm gonna make this public for now, because I'm gonna share some stuff with you guys that we wouldn't be able to do if it was private. So I'm gonna create repository. I'm gonna let this do its thing. It's gonna create the repository, and voila, right? Okay. You're wondering, well, what next? You don't like GitHub, you're just gonna GitHub. Again, you might have to go watch a separate video on how to use GitHub. Then I'm gonna click code. And I've already got the GitHub desktop app, and I know there's a lot of devs that are gonna shit on me for using the GitHub desktop app. I do not care. I like using it. It saves me time. I'm gonna open this with my GitHub desktop app, And as you can see, I've already got a folder on my local desktop that I've already got demos. So I'm going to say, put this in the demo folder and clone. And I don't use VS Code. I use Cursor, which I like. And I'm going to open this in Cursor, right? And that's step 1, right? And that's all you need to do. Now we've gotten this from GitHub to our local Cursor tool that we use to write our code. Now we're going to open up a terminal. And in case you're wondering, you can also go into your, not the Vite config, but the package.json, if you know anything, and you can basically see all the scripts we have. And I'm using npm on this, but I think I maybe want to create a version where you can use npm, pnpm, yarn, whatever you want to use, right? But I'm using npm right now on this. And obviously I've got a few dependencies already, like fs extra, sim server, I've got Vite, and I'm going to explain what that does. We don't need to get into the weeds of that, but if you want to learn more about this, you can do that at your own time. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to do npm install, and that's just going to make sure all the dev dependencies I have and packages actually get installed. And you can see this has generated a package log.json file. Again, don't worry about that if you don't care too much about it. And now the next thing I'm going to do, if I go into my package.json, now I can run npm dev, which is basically running node Vite or Vite. That's all that does, right? So we're going to do npm run dev. And something interesting is going to happen. Now you can see this has created a local host for us. And I'm going to be specific right here. You can see that this local host is localhost 3001. And that's because I already am using 3000 already in a separate project that's still currently running and open. And this has spun up your dev server or live server to use instantly as of this moment. But then you might be wondering, well, how do I get to use this on Webflow, right? And also you might be wondering, how do you close this? If you want to kill your live server, it's Control-C and boom, shut it down, right? And now we're going to go, okay, actually I'll do this demo right with you guys. So this is one I've already started, and I'm going to say Control-C on this other server that I have running, just so we can use the 3000 port. And I'm going to run npm run dev. Okay, now we've got the 3000 port because I closed the other one that I have. And if we opened up Chrome, okay, we got Chrome already opened up. We could basically just click this, right? Or I have multiple tabs open, so it's acting weird, but you don't see nothing, right? But this is working already. Now, how do you use this in Webflow? So we're going to go into our Webflow project, and I've got a couple things to share. So previously, when people write code, right, I have this version that uses no Vite or live server, right? Is you go into your page settings or the, Webflow site settings, and then if you wanted to do an animation, you got to import GSAP, right? And then you got to then write your script. So this first script that I have is a script that gives us this animation, which I'm going to show you guys in a sec, right? This hover animation that we wanted. Again, fairly simple. But then we've got all this script we've written for this animation to work. And then we also have an animation where when we click on the card, it opens up a modal, right? Which means we didn't have to write a separate script, or you can keep writing it, right? But most times you need to separate your script, just to be clear. That's usually how I've seen most devs do it. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? If that's just the only use case you have, then that's fine. But as soon as your code base starts to grow, then you realize even if you're using Slater, then you're having modal hover.js or card hover.js, modal trigger.js or something. Now you're starting to have multiple files, and you start to see how it gets hard to manage, right? So instead of doing that, we're going to use this that we've got. Again, it's not as sexy, but all we just got to do is write a little bit of code. And I've got this set up to where you've got your src and then you've got JS, and there's a couple things to look at. So I've built this in a way where it's specific for Webflow. And if anyone has done any other dev outside of Webflow, you would understand that this is not the typical way you put things. But I've got components, I've got global, and I've got pages, and I've got utilities. And I'm going to explain what that means. Utilities is anything that you want to be reusable, for example, right? And for example, for me, I like to move quick. So instead of me writing document dot query selector manually, I created an utility for that, where all I got to call in is query element instead of me writing this entire line of code, right? So those are utilities. Storage, there's a bunch of other utilities I have which you can use or you can not worry about if you have zero clue how to use them. And then most importantly, I have this pages folder, which means you can then partition code for every page of your website, right? Instead of you just writing a bunch of code where you start running into errors. For example, if you have 20 pages, right? But this model is only working on the homepage. I've run into scenarios where I write my code in such a way where you start having console errors because it's looking for modals on other pages that doesn't have modals, right? And you're loading unnecessary code into pages that don't need that code, right? If that makes sense. So in this way, this allows us to actually partition our code in a more meaningful way, because we can just create a JavaScript file for every page that we have. And in this demo, I'll keep it fairly simple. And so this is for code that you need on every page, right? This is like code specific just to a page. But what about code that you need on every page? I call that global, right? And for example, your navigation and your footer are global elements. Almost every page on a website, typical website, would have a navigation and a footer, right? So now you can write all the custom code for your navigation and your footer in the global, and that's gonna, that code is gonna work on every page pretty much that you have. Whereas the code inside of about page, it's only gonna work on the about page. Now, you don't have code leakage. Like, I don't want to go too deep, but I've done lots of things and I've come to the conclusion you sort of have to partition your code in a very meaningful way. And obviously, if you know about writing code, you can obviously yourself create extra folders or nestings in a nicer way. Like if you don't want your components just to be exposed as files, you can then create component folders yourself as maybe, let's say, buttons, right? Then you can have primary button.js, secondary button.js, or whatever, right? You can kind of like skin this however you want. But this starter file is, let's keep this as simple as possible, right? But you're wondering, well, Carter, how the heck do I use this? And what the heck's going on? How does this work? So for the pages, I've got all these different pages, and you could also create this as folders if you wanted, right? This could be om.js or whatever it is, but we only have single files, so I'm just gonna, leave those as single files. So I've got all these different pages, then I have this main index where I import all the different code that I've written for other pages, right? So now I've got about.js, and I'm using my, custom utilities to query elements, which means instead of writing document query selector or whatever it is, I just call query elements and, whatever it is I want to query. Simple as that. So I've done all of this and I've exported this function about init, right? Which just does a couple simple things right here, right? I can write tons of code if I wanted to. So I've exported this function, and then I've manually then come here to import this function. So if we created a page, for example, called, let's say, service.js, right? Now I can export, default function. Obviously, you can write your code however you want, right? And I'm going to say just console.log service page initialize, right? That's very simple. Now, this code is not going to work until I go into my index. Now I can import, what do we call it? Service init from service.js, right? So importing this function from that file, right? And I've set up routes for you guys. That way you can identify, which page deserves to run certain code. So now we're going to set up a route for service page, and we're going to say service, and we're going to say service init, right? Wait, what just happened? Okay, so we're going to say service, and we're going to call it service init, right? And that's all we need to do. And now, if we go to our service page, if we created a service page in Webflow, for example, so we're going to go service, create. Now, if we wanted that code to only work on the service page, right? Now, all we got to do is say data-route service, which is basically this text that we have, right? Or I could call this service-page if I wanted to, right? Or service page, right? And then it would be data-route equals service page, right? But we're going to keep that as service. So let's go back to cursor. So you get the gist of that, right? And that code is going to work. But this is just explaining how the folder structure works and how you can import and export functions and whatever it is, and how this page route works. And then this is a very, very simple page route, right? And that's because we're using Webflow. You can build on top of this if you want at any point, right? But this is just a very simple starter file that anyone can use. But I have a personal one that I'm not sharing publicly that's more complex, right? For things like authentication, like where you can use Auth0, or you can use Clerk, or you have APIs and you can spin up a Node.js Express server, and like it gets more complicated, right? But this is very simple, where I know most people are using just creating simple animations with GSAP, creating swiper sliders and all that jazz, right? This is gonna work for you. And again, if you know code and if you get into authentication and all that stuff, then you could probably figure it out on your own. You don't gotta watch my video. So that's that. And same with the global, right? Is I have a navigation. Again, you can write your export default functions. Like you can use fat arrows if you wanted, right? Like there's different ways you can write your functions, but that's not what we're talking about here. I've exported navigation init, and I'm calling this inside of global init. Now, if I go back into my pages index.js, actually into my index.js, which is my main one, you can see I'm calling in my page router, I'm calling in my global init, and I'm calling in my components. So those are my three major things on this setup. As you can see, we've got our page router, which means this helps us write code for each specific page. We've got our global init, which helps us write code that we want to use on every page. And then we've got our components, which is now even very, very specific to code for each component, which means you could write code for a component. You don't have to put that component code in your index.js here like we've done. You can write the code for the component, then import that code in here. So I'm going to show you, for example, right? I wrote a component, for example, component, and I can come to my home page and say I'm going to import example component into my own page, and once I run this function right here, then I'm going to run example component, for example, right? You can kind of structure things in that manner if you wanted, right? And it's going to work, but I'm not doing that. I don't need that, so we're going to delete that. But you get the gist of it, right? So you can kind of like structure things in however way you want, but just to keep it simple, we're going to keep it simple to, I'm not saving that. We're going to keep it simple to components, global, and pages, as you can see, right? And all this is doing is waiting for the DOM to load, and then we init the global, we init components, and we need page router. And you can kind of like structure this in whichever way you want. They all kind of get loaded at the same time from what I tested, to be honest. But this is all about the actual code. You're wondering, well, Carter, how the heck do I get this to work in Webflow? And there's a README that I've created. right? You can go through this README to understand how things work, how to clone the repository, cd, Webflow, Vite starter, whatever that is, npm install, npm run dev to spin up your live server locally. This kind of explains, the folder structures. And then to get this to work in Webflow, I actually got to update this document because I'm missing something out. What you need is this. You just got to call in your local host like this as a module. And I'm going to update this in the documents, right? So rather than call in 50 different scripts, rather than call in 100 different scripts, you can just call in your local host, which is this that we have. Again, if this was localhost 3001, right, we would basically write, localhost 3001. But pretty much all you need is this first one right here, right? Localhost 3000 /js /index.js, which is this right here, right? That's just going to run whatever code you have. But then there's something that happens is you have to refresh your page every time you make a change. And I'm just going to demo that for you guys. So I'm going to go to my homepage where I have this working. And as you can see, I've got my data-route home, so we know we're on the home page. And I've got a couple code I'm going to show you that does what it needs to do. Actually, not yet, because I haven't put the code in. So let me do this live with you guys right now and spin up a new component that I've kind of set up to the side. So what we want to do is, you can see this is not going to work. Actually, if we go right here, because there's nothing. This is not working yet because we haven't created the code for it. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up the components. This is a component, and I'm going to call this, again, I've created this on the site already. So I'm going to call this state card.js. And for state card.js, we need a couple things, right? And first, something else that's great is instead of you battling with trying to like with this, right, you have to pull in this gsap script like this, right? You can simply use npm or yarn or whatever it is to say npm install gsap, and voila, brother. You've got gsap on there. You can go to your package.json. You see the gsap dependencies right in there, right? Or you could do npm install gsap -- save, right, if you just want to save it on this. But you can figure out all that at your own time. So now I've got gsap installed without having to add gsap into part of my script. If I wanted to install swiper, I can say npm install swiper. And if you're wondering how I know all of this, that's just, for me, it's common knowledge, right? But if you went to gsap.com, and with me, I do pay for gsap because I like supporting them. I'm gonna have to change my auth token now. But you can basically see that typically you would have to use a cdn, or you could use npm, and then import gsap, or you could use yarn or whatever it is, right? There's actually issues with yarn right now because you got to download instead of using the npm instead. But that's gsap, right? If we wanted to install swiper, we've already installed swiper, and you can see the versions as well, right? So you can also go to the website of whatever package it is you want, right? Getting started with swiper, and then npm install swiper, or you could also do npm install swiper at version 10 if that's what you wanted, right? So you can control whatever versions you want, and you can say npm remove, I think, swiper, because we don't need swiper, and voila, swiper is gone. It's not in our dependencies anymore, right? It's quite easy, and you can always figure your way around that, and you can always reference your package.json to see what packages you've got installed. So back to statecard.js. So now we've got gsap installed. I've got this code all written up already, and I'm just going to paste this in here, right? And all this code does is, this is basically the state card hover animation that we have. If you want me to look through it, I use data attributes instead of CSS, and I'm using my custom utilities that I use to query elements. Or you could technically write document.query selector and then do that. But query element is shorter for me, so I like that. Simple animation, right? But if we go back to our website, right, nothing happens. And you're going to run into that. Why is that? Because we need to import this function of our animation state card into our index.js. So I'm just going to do import state card from statecard.js. And you might be wondering, what's the difference between this one with the yellow curly brackets versus the one without the curly brackets? That's just because I'm exporting as default function. But if I don't have default in there and I'm just exporting as a function, then I would have to use the curly brackets. And you can look up what that means or how that works. But just showing you the differences, and I did that intentionally just so you can kind of see what that means. So now we've got state card, and now all we have to do is call in, state card, open that bracket, and save. And guess what? Once we go to our website, we don't even have to refresh it. I think. Wait, maybe we have to do. Yeah. So we're missing something. That's why we gotta refresh this. We're missing our Vite. So you can see it doesn't refresh by itself, and that's because we are missing something. And I gotta go find it. Again, I gotta update the documentation to include it, but it's on a different one that I've created that's live already. So I'm just gonna go to my repositories and actually my profile, and I'm gonna copy this. I gotta update this document. So we need this Vite client or Vite client. And what this does is this enables hot modal reload or refresh. I think it's called HMR. And that means whenever you save something, it refreshes your page for you automatically. Like right now, we made a save. We have to do the manual refresh, which can get annoying when you're in development, right? So I'm going to copy this, and we just need this code right here and replace that. And so it's localhost /@vite/client. Again, you don't need to worry about how that works. I've done the hard work already for you. And once we publish that, you would see that as soon as I make a change, let's say I, comment this out, you could see that I didn't even have to, wait, we haven't refreshed our page yet. Okay, so now this is not working anymore, right? Now, if I go back in and, take out the comment from that, you would see that because we have that Vite right here, now we don't have to even refresh our page. It just refreshes by itself automatically. So that's the only reason why you'd need that. If you want to refresh yourself, hey, knock yourself out. So there's that. But then I've got another thing I want to show is the modal, right? Where, when you click on this, it opens this up. And remember, we have that same code working with no Vite Live server, but we had to manually write all this different code. And now we're managing 120 lines of code right inside of Webflow. Whereas with this one, we would have been managing about maybe 52 lines. Let's see how many lines that took us. They're about 52 lines, right? And instead, we're only managing 2 lines of code, right? it's a game changer already. So that's working. So now what we're gonna do is we need our modal. And I've already set that up inside of Webflow already, in case you're wondering. I just didn't want to do the whole design and setup, right? You can see I've got my data attributes because I don't like using CSS just because data attributes feels more consistent to me without having to worry about CSS. I don't know. That's just my personal preference. You can use whatever you want. So I've got my modal component, which is on display, block. I can set up default CSS if I want, but I want an animation for the modal, which I've already written as well. So I'm going to come here and create another component that's called stateModal.js. And for the sake of time, I'm going to copy and paste what I've already written. And again, if you want to read through this, I'm using my query element. I'm creating all my modal elements, and then I'm setting an initial state in GSAP. And also, I usually recommend to set initial state with CSS as well. That way, things don't flicker once the page loads, because JavaScript, CSS loads before JavaScript, I guess. So functional, open modal, close modal animation. And again, like I said, if we go to our page, again, we're not refreshing our website because we have the HMR from Vite working, right? We click, nothing happens. Again, why? Because we need to import this function of the modal into our index.js. So now I'm going to come back in here and import state modal from state modal.js, right? That's the file path. And I'm going to save, right? And as soon as I save, again, because we have HMR, I don't have to refresh. Now I got to click because it's already refreshed. Uh-oh. Oh, my fault. Again, I forgot that I need to call that in here. Call that function state modal.js, and now that should work. Okay. And that's pretty much it. So you're really just spending your time then managing all of this outside of Webflow. And for me, it just creates a more seamless experience once you start having a large code base or you start doing lots of stuff with custom code. Again, like you see, it took us a while to set this up, but as soon as you've got this set up and running, like, it's pretty fast. But here's a catch though. If I sent this website to someone else, because this code is working locally, right? We are on local host, right? Those scripts are not going to run on someone else's computer, or even if on my computer, actually, if I did this, right? If I went to my node server and I used Control-C to kill my server, and I go back to my website, you can see if I refresh this, now nothing happens, right? Because the server is not working anymore. And that's pretty much the same thing on someone else's computer, right? And this brings me up to my next part of this long video. Stick with me. So because of that, there's tools like Code Sandbox that you could use, right, to run a virtual machine. That way, you know, things are working for you at all times. So let me go to my personal one. So I could easily go to import Code Sandbox and find my repository, which is this demo. I don't want to do that right now, but you can import that into Code Sandbox, and then pretty much Code Sandbox would give you okay, let me just do that for the sake of this video. So import my repository from Code Sandbox. I'm going to use the smallest one. I'm going to kill it anyway once I'm done. So Code Sandbox goes, does its thing. Again, if you don't want localhost and you're working and you want to share this to someone else, then this is where Code Sandbox comes in, because this gives you a virtual machine and a dev container that you can use. You'll see what it does its thing. I don't know how it works, but it does its thing. So universal template, yes, it's going to run npm install and it's going to run npm run dev, which I've set up. Next, I'm going to apply, and it's going to install dependencies, and Code Sandbox is done 300, then open preview. But guess what? Code Sandbox now gives me this, right? Which means instead of using localhost, now I could replace this localhost with this Code Sandbox link instead, right? And it would work pretty much the same way. And now since this is an actual link that anyone can go to live, right? Then, you know, that kind of solves that problem, right? If you don't want to work just on localhost, is use something like Code Sandbox. And I'm sure there's other tools that you could possibly use, but my go-to if I need it is Code Sandbox. But again, you got to pay for credits on Code Sandbox for how long your virtual machine runs. So sometimes you got to kill stuff, and it's not perfect, but it works. And maybe I'll make another video specifically about how to best use it effectively in Code Sandbox. I'm telling you, I've crashed my Code Sandbox VM lots of times, and I've had to contact Code Sandbox support, and they've been great at helping me actually. So shout out to Code Sandbox. Again, no one's sponsoring this video, but check them out. It just works. And I think they have free accounts as well, where you don't have to pay. I just think you don't get as much credits or you don't get access to dev containers and whatnot. And I'll let you guys know if I find other alternatives that might be free or cheaper than Code Sandbox as well. Again, I'm not the person that's just sold on one specific tool. I like exploring, seeing if there's better options, and different people have different uses. So back to the drill. Now let's say we are completely done with our Webflow project. We've been writing this code for about 3 months. We're ready to launch, right? Guess what? Since my repository is actually live on GitHub as a public repo, what I'm going to do right here is I'm going to run npm run dev, right? If I go back to my package.json, you would see I've got npm run build, and that's just going to build my file. Now there's a couple things I've done here, which if you've ever used Node or npm or whatever it is to run a build file, right? It basically builds all your file into one single file, right? We've got like lots of different JavaScript files. It just compiles it into one for us and keeps things simple, right? So what I've done is I've added npm run build. I've added npm run build minor, npm run build major. And if you're wondering, those are inside of the scripts. And if you really know that code, go dive into it and mess this up and let me see what you come up with. And I think I'm trying to figure out a way to make this open source so more people can contribute. I've never made anything open source before, so I got to figure that out so more people can contribute and run PRs and we can improve what this thing is for everyone else. So you don't need to worry about all this jazz actually, but what happens is once you're done and you need to launch, all you got to do is run npm run build. Now, here's the catch. Here's where the magic happens, right? npm run build. Boom, it's run a build for me. But typically, when you run npm run build, it just gives you a single index.js file. And then you really don't know what versions you have. And I'm going to explain exactly why this is a thing, right? Now, it's run a version for me where the default version, I set it up as not 1, but 2. So your first version is always version 2 because version 1 is the version from when you cloned the repository, right? That's the version 1 is the repository itself. Now your version starts from version 2, but you can see that this is version 0.02, right? But what if, okay, so let me show you this. So we have version 0.02. And what we're going to do is I'm going to use my cursor as a shortcut to say initial production commit, right? For example, and I'm going to commit all of this. Yes. We're going to let cursor do its thing. Again, you could do this in your CLI if you wanted or in your terminal, but we're not going to do that. And now I'm going to go into my GitHub. And I need to find my repository. And again, come on. If you look at my commits, I kind of locked in somewhere in between this day. I feel like I was slacking all year, but I'm starting to code a little bit more. And I think 2025 is going to be better. And I plan on releasing like a bunch of tools, bunch of tutorials and whatnot. And I don't know, just stick around. Subscribe to the channel, I guess. That's my plug. Subscribe to the channel where I'm going to share more stuff. So you can see that this has been updated now, obviously, and this is also live on GitHub. And I made this a public repository because now since it's public, we can use JS deliver for our code on Webflow. Now I can go to production. Also, so when you run the build, it gives you a build inside of your SRC, I believe. Did I make it that way? Or is it all production? I think it might all be production. Wait, hold on. Let me see. So let's go to, so SRC dist. And so the thing is, I set up this in my git ignore, I believe, where it ignores my dist folder, right? So then I use my production folder instead. So now I've got production, and now you can see you've got latest. You don't need the index.html, and then you've got versions. Again, you could use GitHub tags to do this, but I made this because there's probably people that don't know how to use GitHub tags. So if you know how to use GitHub tags to create versions, just ignore that, delete that script, and just run npm run build, and your stuff would work, and then you can use GitHub tags to manage your versions as you want, right? But I can then go into my production folder, then I can maybe choose to use versions, for example, and say I want to use version 0.02, go to index, and now I'm going to open JS deliver. I'm going to go to tools, and I'm going to say convert from GitHub, and now I can copy this file or this link from GitHub into JS deliver. If I do this, voila. So you got to do the test. So now all our code it's worked as magic, right? It's been compiled and minified into one single JavaScript files. And also, here's a catch. I forgot to mention this as well, is you can also use your env, right? If you have environment code, which means if you're using APIs, or for example, if you end up getting GSAP premium, right? If you were to use GSAP premium on Webflow, you would be exposing your token, right? Just like I'd expose my token, I can go generate a new token and then put that token in a .env file, or I could do a .env.local file, and then I can then have API key equals whatever, right? And then I can then use that API key wherever I need to use it. Or obviously, like if you're getting into the weeds of this, obviously if you're maybe using actual APIs, then you obviously can spin up a Express Node.js server, host that, and then use that on your client side, right? Just to make sure you have protection. But again, I don't want to get into the weeds of that. That's not the point of this video. So we've got this main JavaScript file. Now we can just come here, copy this, and now I'm just going to do this instead. I'm going to comment this out, which I like doing. Wait, is it not that? Yeah. And now I can say script. Again, remember, we're using module, right? Now we're going to use script. And we're going to say type equals text / JavaScript. And src equals, I'm going to close our script tag. And now we've gone from having 400 lines of code to just one, right? Now we can paste that in there from JS deliver, because now we're using our GitHub to host. And now if we publish this, fingers crossed, that should work. There we go, voila. And our code works, right? And now we've saved ourselves like tons of hard work, right? And as far as managing stuff. But again, just so you know, with JS Deliver, you really don't have control on the cache, because sometimes you make changes, but then your changes don't reflect, for example, right? Which is why I created this thing where if you want to use the latest one, right, your latest version, this is always going to be the latest version of npm run build you have. So I'm going to show you this. So let's say you've gone into your project, the client had a review, and they're like, oh, can you change this animation, change this colors, change whatever it is. Now I can run npm run build, and I'm going to say, because I made a lot of changes, this change is a major build, right? npm run build major, which your first build or your production build should be major, and then you can then have minor or whatever it is. So I'm going to say npm run build major. Now you could see it's now gone from v0.02 to v1.00, right? So now we have version 1, but maybe underneath version 1 I had some little updates. I can say npm run build minor, right? And now we've got v1.1. But let's say we made even smaller changes, right? We can then say npm run build. And now it's going to be v1.1.1. And now if we wanted to have a couple more changes, again, this is your discretion, right? We can say npm run build minor. So now it's going to be v1.2.1. Wait, npm run build. Okay, now it's v1.2.0, and then we can say npm run build major. Wait, run build major, and now it's going to be v.2, right? Fresh slate. But you're wondering, well, Carter, I made a mistake just doing all these things, right? Well, you can run npm run clean, and it's going to take you back down to version back to version 0.1. And I can't remember if I did like npm run clean at certain version. I'm going to check. If I don't have that, I'm going to make that happen. That way you can specify which version you want to clean. It just doesn't clean all your versions, right? Now you're back at 0.01, but now I'm going to say npm run dev run build major. Again, we haven't committed any of this to GitHub yet. Now it's back to 1.0.1 or 1.0. Now I can then go back to GitHub and I'll say, new production build for V1. And I'm going to commit this into GitHub, sync changes, and we can see this happen live in GitHub instantly. Happen now. And then you've got latest, which is always the latest at all times, right? That updates automatically. You can check the manifest, which I set up, and you can kind of like see, and you can also check this just generates index.js that kind of shows you what you could do, but ignore that. Again, this is not only to be used on Webflow, you can use this outside of Webflow, which is why I kind of have some of those things in there. Index.js. Now we've got the latest, or if we wanted a specific version, we could go to our versions, and then you can see like my last commit message, production build for V1. Now we've got V1 in here. Now we can go to index.js. Now, instead of even copying this old thing from JS deliver, we can easily go back in here and just change that to the version name we want, which is v1.0.0, and that should work as well. Only if our repository is public. If it's not public, it's not going to work because it's a private repo. Then at that point, you got to find your own CDN to host your code, right? And also, if you don't want to use GitHub, I would say you could still use the Webflow hack, where you go ahead and you could do this, download this version, for example. I'm gonna wait. So let's do this. Let's go to GitHub. Let's do it through GitHub. So we can download this version as a raw file, right? And then go into our Finder. Can I open a new Finder window on here? Okay, downloads. And you can then rename this like index.js.txt. Again, I really don't recommend this because it's like, it becomes really hard to manage, because then you can then upload that as well into Webflow and it should actually work the same. So we're going to do that. And then we're going to copy this link, go to our settings, and then, slap that in there. All right. Instead of this, it would be the Webflow link, and that should work as well, right? So you can use your CDN and host in whichever way, but so you know, I don't do this on page level. I do this in the actual page settings. I use a ThemeSuite extension to do this. That way I don't have to bounce in and out. Save, or you could go to site settings, obviously, and custom code, and you would see that code appears already in there. That way it works in every page. And that's pretty much it. In about 10 minutes, under an hour, we were able to get this done. Obviously, there's lots to go through, and I haven't done the documentations properly yet. There's things I need to update in the documentation. But if this is of any interest, drop a comment. And while this is still in production, obviously I use this already for myself as of today. I want to know, from what you've seen, is there any thoughts you have on how this could be improved in the flows, in the folder structure? Is it too simple? Is it too complex? And again, like, I can even show you guys a more complex folder structure for a different project that I have, right? Let me see. There's a version I have that even has a little bit more complex. Let's see, where is it? I think it might be this V2. I don't know. I think. And yeah, this goes even into more like animations is separate, components is separate, pages is separate, utilities is separate, and the pages then has folders, right? So it's like you can really skin the folders however way you want. Then it just matters about how you import and export stuff to make sure it shows up on the main index.js file, right? So you can use your discretion at that point. But so let me know if this was any helpful at all. Like I said, there's tools that are great like Slater, but again, with Slater we would have to manually import all these different files we have individually, right? Statemodal.js, statecard.js, and now that starts to grow. Whereas with this one, we've condensed all of that to just one single script file that we can manage easily. So if this was any helpful, let me know. Let me know your thoughts. Like I said, if you want any new features in that, if you want any updates, if things feel confusing. Again, this is my first time really recording an uncut video about this. And there's better ways I can explain this. So let me know your thoughts, and I'll see you guys on my next YouTube video. So like, share, and subscribe, or whatever people say at the end of the videos. Bye-bye.